Hey folks, Iolair here, and welcome to my review of the brand new premium Tier 9 Japanese battleship, the Hizen. This is the final reward of the Dockyard event taking place during updates 0912 and 0100, and thanks to Wargaming for providing this ship to me at no cost for this review. Now, before I get to the review, I'd like to advise or maybe remind folks that I'm running 3 giveaways, 2 on YouTube and 1 on Discord. For one of the YouTube giveaways and for the Discord giveaway, the deadlines to enter are this Thursday, December 24th. And for the second YouTube giveaway, the deadline to enter is Thursday, December 31st. I'll be giving away CC containers, subscriber camo packs, Santa containers, and doubloons. You can catch all the details in this 3-minute video in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, and I'll leave a link to the video in the description below as well. All right, so coming back to the review, I'll start with a too long, didn't read condensed summary, followed by some gameplay. I'll then go to port and talk about the Dockyard event, the Hizen's specifications, my build with some options that you may want to consider in your build. And I'll offer some final thoughts about the ship. And finally, you can find the post-match results at the end of the video as well. So as usual, I've left an index for the video in the description below so you can jump around or rewatch sections as you'd like. All right, so the too long didn't read condensed summary is that the Hizen is a decent 12-gun battleship that is best played at mid-range. Compared with other upper-tier Japanese battleships, she is notable for having more guns, but worse accuracy, a longer main battery reload, and somewhat worse survivability. I found that getting the most out of her requires patience. I don't feel like she's really the upfront flank pusher unless she's top tier and her flank has clear superiority. Now, despite the somewhat inferior characteristics, I have found her quite playable and would definitely recommend folks interested in playing battleships, or maybe any player, to complete the grind and pick her up. So doing a more detailed comparison of the main batteries between the Hizen and other Japanese battleships at Tier 8 and Tier 9, she does have the most number of guns at 12, but she also has the longest reload at 38 seconds base. That can be brought down to 33.4 seconds with the main battery modification 3 upgrade in slot 6, which is what I would definitely recommend for this ship. But even the Amagi and Ki, which don't have access to that 6 upgrade slot, still have a better reload than the Hizen with the upgrade. The range is very playable at 20.3 kilometers. I definitely would not recommend taking the gunfire control system upgrade in slot 6 to extend the range. I just don't think the Hizen lends herself to long-range gunnery like the Izumo and Musashi can. The dispersion is okay at 215 meters, and that's going to be roughly the same as all of these Japanese battleships at that 20-kilometer mark. But the real kicker is going to be the Sigma at 1.7, and that means that her shells are not going to be grouped very well, and she's going to feel more like a shotgun, than I think a lot of Japanese battleship players might be accustomed to or be comfortable with. So it's something to keep in mind, and it's why I tended to play her more as a mid-range battleship. Now, the other key distinction, in my opinion, around this ship relative to her peers is she receives 1 fewer repair party charge than most other battleships. So she gets 3 charges out of the box, and that can be increased to 4 charges with Superintendent. But for me, that meant playing more conservatively to manage my health better and tend not to push in too aggressively and too early because she doesn't have the same means to stay in the game for as long. Basically, her HP pool or effective pool is smaller than many of her peers. So as for armor, it's unremarkable. She has a 32 millimeter bow and stern like most battleships at this tier, but also she has a lot of other areas that are 32 millimeters, like around the casemate and deck, which makes her very vulnerable to HE spam and to AP penetrations, even by heavy cruisers. And again, this goes back to the fact that she doesn't have that additional charge of repair party, and so playing more conservatively and carefully is important. Her AA is frankly pretty poor. relative to most Tier 9 battleships. The Musashi is worse, but there isn't too much else that's worse in terms of AA at this tier. And so she might do relatively well against Tier 8 aircraft, but against Tier 10 carriers, they're going to be able to drop her pretty much with impunity. By the way, take a look at this shot at this Conqueror at not quite 16 kilometers. See how many shells that we land here. This is actually a pretty good shot, and in my experience, based on how I played her, was better than I normally saw at that range. So that was 7 of 12 shells on with 6 penetrations. So that was pretty good. Now, interestingly, she has a pretty decent secondary complement. Her base range is 7 kilometers, which means that with a full secondary build, including signal, upgrades, skills, etc., can be send the secondaries out to 10.6 kilometers. The Izumo and Musashi and the Yamato also have the same base range. But again, given the relatively unremarkable armor scheme and the one fewer charge of repair party consumable, I don't think this ship is going to lend herself to playing as a secondary battleship very well. And I've heard anecdotally that people have tried it, and she just doesn't do very well. In fact, I never really got into situations where I was really close against other battleships because looking at her armor scheme, I'm not sure how well protected the Citadel is. There does look like there's some sort of a quasi-turtleback, and when I go to port, I'll show you what this looks like. But it doesn't, I don't think she's going to survive very well in close quarters, especially in drive-by situations. All right, so how did I end up playing her? Well, very much like what you're seeing here. And this is how I found it tended to work best for me. I tended to put myself in kiting postures quite early so that I could manage my engagements, especially if I was against a flank that was of similar capability or similar firepower, or certainly was a superior firepower to the flank that I was on. I would be in a kiting posture. I found that her rear firing angles were quite good, and so she did lend herself to being a good kiter and being able to slow flanks, which is exactly how things worked out in this particular match and how I ran her and a number of other matches. Now, I did have other matches where I was on the strong flank and I would act more as a pushing battleship, but she really needs the help of other battleships to be with her so that she isn't absorbing all of the damage or trying to absorb all the damage on the flank. Again, going back to my comments about her somewhat limited survivability relative to her peers. So in this particular game, our team is doing pretty well. Obviously, we have a 3-ship advantage. We do have a point advantage, but we don't have any caps yet. But our Fletcher, which is our sole destroyer, is about to slip into Bravo to take that cap. We do take down the Bismarck here on the Alpha side. And this is working out quite well for our team because the opponents are trying to push into Alpha, and they are now essentially outnumbered. So we have Wichita, Massachusetts, although Massachusetts is quite low, myself, and our Buffalo, although I don't know how effective our Buffalo is being. But I'm basically, like I said, I'm working in a kiting posture. You can see I'm basically stationary, just trying to keep the flank from pushing forward. Take another broadside shot here on the Thunder. I don't remember how well this came out. But on the east side, we have a clear advantage. We haven't taken the cap, but at this point, that's okay. Because we're wearing down the opponents quite quickly. The Massachusetts goes down. That leaves me the only battleship on this side. So I need to start moving and not let these battleships get too close. Especially, I don't want that Georgia getting her secondaries on me. I'm going to focus on the Thunder first because she is more accurate, I think. I should be, because she has less health. Oh, there she goes down to our Buffalo. Okay, so that worked out. And so now that Georgia basically has run out of friends, and we can just focus on him. There is the opposing destroyer that was at Charlie, and his last known location was at Echo 8, it looks like. The Georgia goes down, and that leaves our flank completely wide open. I don't remember if our Wichita is going to move into the cap or be able to do that and stay relatively safe. to be able to take the cap. In fact, it looks like he won't be able to because the carrier is sending planes now to the Alpha cap. And you can see I think that's our Fletcher that's pinging on the map, asking for help and coverage and spotting things over by Bravo. But our allies are going to be able to, should be able to move into the cap. In fact, there's the Z46. He's in the Bravo cap. He probably has the Fletcher hydroed. The Wichita has activated surveillance, it looks like, and lit up the Z50 or Z46, or maybe that was the Buffalo. The Wichita does go down to torpedoes from the carrier, but now it's perfectly safe for me to push in and move over to the Alpha cap and now get onto the flank of, well, a failed div, which included a Colorado. So one thing I didn't point out in this particular match, each team had brought a Tier 7 battleship to the game. The Allies had a Gneisenau and the opponents had a Colorado. This is, I'd much rather be a Gneisenau in an up-tier situation or a failed div situation than a Colorado. So I kind of felt bad for this player who was stuck in this match. But like I said, it's perfectly safe now for me to push into the Alpha cap, help take that cap. And you can see our allies have moved into the Charlie cap. We've got a really strong handle on this game. One other thing I should mention about my play style and what had worked for me. So in general, my average damage was probably in the 90 to 100,000 mark. But I was in a lot of games where I felt like our team just didn't do very well, and we ended up losing. And so being in the kiting posture allowed me to manage my engagements well and get some decent damage in. But it doesn't lend itself necessarily very well to being able to push and take caps. And I did try in a few games where I would try to be the tip of the spear, and I just didn't feel like it worked out. So we're going to end up winning this match quite handedly, and I'm going to spare you us sinking the Z46 and taking down the carrier, and I'll move to the port to talk through the dockyard and the ship and my build. Okay, here we are in port with the Hizen, and I will start with the dockyard. So this Dockyard event is structurally very similar to what we had for the Odin and the Anchorage, but there are some notable differences. Specifically, there are 26 shipbuilding phases, of which we can complete 22 using combat missions. Players will have to purchase at least 4 shipbuilding phases with doubloons. The base cost for each phase is 1,950 doubloons, so if you don't buy any of the starter packs, which I'll get to here in a moment, the cost would be 7,800 doubloons for a premium tier 9 ship, assuming that you only bought 4 phases. As I mentioned, there are some starter packs. There are 2. There's one pack which costs 9,950 doubloons. That gets you 10 phases. And then there is another starter pack which costs 5,000 doubloons, which gets you 4 phases. And this second starter pack would be very sensible for players to buy into. Basically, it's a 30+% reduction in cost relative to the 7,800 that players will be required to spend if they don't get a starter pack in order to get the ship. So if you are really inclined to get the Hizen and you know that you're going to have the time and interest in getting her, it does make sense to get at least this 4-phase starter pack, since it will cost quite a bit less. Now, there are obviously prizes or rewards we receive at every phase. 2 that I want to call out. At phase 5, we get the premium tier 2 Japanese destroyer, the Tachibana. And if you already have the ship in port, you will get just shy of 1.5 million credits as credit for having the ship. Note that I think this only applies to the Tachibana and not to the Tachibana Lima, which is a variant of the same ship. It's basically just a reskinned version. So keep that in mind. The other notable prize is at the 15th shipbuilding phase, which is the Yahagi. This is a premium tier 5 Japanese cruiser, and if you already have this ship in port, you will receive 4,000 doubloons in credit. So if you already have this ship and you bought the starter pack at 5,000 doubloons, your total net cost investment would only be 1,000 doubloons, which is not bad. to get a premium Tier 9 ship. And then obviously the last reward, once you get to this 26 shipbuilding phase, gets you the Hizen. It also gives you a permanent camouflage. One other factor considering the Dockyard event is if you spend doubloons to accelerate purchase of the Hizen and you get the Hizen before you have completed all of the combat missions, you should continue working through the combat missions, because each combat mission that returns a shipbuilding phase will earn you 200 steel and 400 research points. So it's definitely in your interest to keep working through the combat missions for those rewards as well. That's on top of whatever rewards you get through the Dockyard itself, and obviously by getting the Hizen early. So that's the shipbuilding phase. You can find the combat missions. I'm going to go back to port here. You can find the combat missions by clicking on this top tab, and this takes you to the Dockyard combat missions section. The first section is available now, and then subsequent sections will be available as you complete them, and I think they will also be unlocked somewhat later. I think this one is going to be unlocked in 5 days. Yeah, so they're going to unlock each of one of these 7 combat mission sections each week, and the overall time to complete the Dockyard event is 56 days, and that covers both 0912 and 0100. All right, so that is the Dockyard. Let's talk about the ship. So starting with her armor, and I talked about this to some extent during the gameplay, she has battleship level armor suitable to upper tiers. She has a 32 millimeter bow and stern. She has a reasonably good armor belt at 356 millimeters, but you'll notice here that her deck and her upper plating is this casemate area is 32 millimeters. And as I mentioned during the gameplay, this makes her very vulnerable, to HE spam from IFHE light cruisers to German cruisers, and even AP shells from heavy cruisers. So she is going to potentially eat a lot of damage that way if she's giving you a lot of side. Her turtleback, which I kind of referenced during the gameplay, let me strip away the casemates. You can kind of see it here. There are these sloped decks, but they're very steep. So I have heard anecdotally that this doesn't really give her a lot of protection, and it sits, well, it looks like slightly above the waterline. So like I said, in my experience in the gameplay, I never got in super close to get into sort of drive-by situations and really test this, but I do know, or I have heard anecdotally through other CCs and so forth, that she is pretty vulnerable to Citadel hits in close quarters. So that's something to keep in mind. I really don't see her being a brawler in any real sense. Survivability, her hit point pool is decent at just shy of 76,000. Her torpedo protection is kind of middling. It's better than German torpedo protection at 25%, but it's not as good as, let's say, the Musashi receives at over 40%. So it's kind of middle of the road. It's usable, but it's not great. Guns I talked about extensively during the review. I don't want to go over this too much more detail. Base reload of 38 seconds. It's 33.4 with the main battery modification 3 upgrade in slot 6. The range is 20.3 kilometers. The ballistics are pretty playable. The shells aren't super slow or anything or floaty. They're pretty linear time to target. So I found learning the ballistics was relatively straightforward for this ship. AP alpha is 12,750, and the HE alpha is quite strong at 7,500 or 6,500, excuse me, with a solid base fire chance of 30%. I did talk about her secondary complement. She has 2 calibers, 155 and 127. Again, these have a base range of 7 kilometers. This shows 7.3 because I have the aiming systems upgrade in slot 3, which slightly improves the range and accuracy of the secondaries. But again, she could be spec'd into a secondary build and get her secondaries out to 10.6 kilometers, but I would not recommend it for this ship. Getting to AA, again, I talked about this. Her AA is pretty weak. It's definitely in the lower half and probably sort of the second to bottom quadrant, or quartile, I should say, for Tier 9 battleships. The Musashi is worse. The Friedrich der Große, the German battleship at Tier 9, has substantially better AA, and German battleships don't tend to have a very good reputation with regard to strong AA. The best AA is going to be, Missouri, Jean Bar, the Alsace to some extent. So again, she's not going to fare very well against airplanes, especially against Tier 10. For maneuverability, her base speed is 28.2 knots, and with a speed signal that gets it just shy of 30 knots. So it's a very playable speed. Her turning circle and rudder shift time are pretty typical for battleships at this tier. So it's not remarkably big or small, and she's not remarkably sluggish. She's not as maneuverable as some battleships, but it's not something that people are going to feel like they're struggling with, in my opinion. Concealment is okay. Her best concealment is 13.7 kilometers, and with a 20.3 kilometer firing range, that gets you not quite 7 kilometers difference between her best concealment and her firing range, which gives her some decent flexibility to be able to position in places where she can be mid-range, use mid-range gunnery, but also be able to slip into concealment if she needs to get out of detection and not be focused out. All right, so those are her specs. Let me get to my build, starting with my upgrades. So main battery modification 1 in slot 1. Basically, this is a classic tank build. Tank concealment build. Damage control system modification 1 and 2 in slots 2 and 4. Aiming systems in slot 3. I definitely would recommend this upgrade for slot 3. You could take the main battery modification 2 upgrade to improve the turret rotation, because the turret rotation with the main battery modification 3 upgrade in slot 6 is 43.1 seconds. But if you're doing a lot of kiting and a lot of sort of very measured maneuvering, having the turrets keep up with you isn't really too much of a big deal. So I definitely would recommend tightening up the salvos, especially since the Sigma is so mediocre, to give you some better chance of landing shells on target. Slot 5, concealment. Definitely want to be able to get back into concealment if you start getting focused. Again, she does have those vulnerabilities from an armor perspective and from a damage farming, and she doesn't have, she has one fewer charge of a repair party than her peers. And then last but not least, and again, I mentioned this during the gameplay, I take the main battery modification 3 upgrade in slot 6 to improve the reload. Especially with a 38-second reload, I think you're going to want to have this. You don't have the flexibility like the U.S. Navy battleships, like the Minnesota, to take a special plotting room upgrade that's unique to the U.S. Navy battleships to improve accuracy. Getting the reload is the better way to improve her overall performance. As far as consumables, repair party, obviously, damage control, obviously. Repair party, I talked about extensively during the gameplay. She has one fewer charge than her peers, and then you can take either a fighter, or a spotter. I take the spotter for better viewing on opponents that might be on the other side of terrain, and sometimes for the extra range if I really need it. All right, so going to my commander skills. So this is just a straight up tank build. I like priority target. A lot of players prefer preventative maintenance. That's up to you. I like the information that priority target gives me as far as when I might be getting focused, or if a known destroyer or a suspected destroyer may be sending torpedoes on me. I can use this information. I think it's very useful. Expert marksman is definitely going to be desirable because the turrets are pretty sluggish. Adrenaline rush is kind of a mainstay of any surface combat ship in the game. And then the standard 4 skills for endurance and concealment. So basics of survivability, superintendent, fire prevention, and concealment. So like I said, a classic build. Now, as far as signals, I would just take the standard 6 combat signals for a battleship. So November Foxtrot to reduce the cooldown on consumables. Sierra Mike to improve your speed, India Delta to recover more health when you're using the repair party consumable, Juliet Yankee Botus 2 to reduce the duration of flooding, India Yankee to reduce the duration of fires, and then Juliet Charlie to eliminate the chance of detonating. It does happen on battleships. It's not a unicorn situation. I've definitely been detonated while playing battleships. If you want to preserve these for for competitive games, that makes sense too. But if you are going to take combat signals, these are the 6 I would take. All right, so let me offer some final thoughts on this ship, and hopefully you already have a pretty good impression of my thoughts here. I have quite enjoyed this ship. I find that her Sigma is probably the biggest challenge that players, and certainly myself, have to get used to when playing the ship. It means working at mid-range so that you can improve your chances of landing more shells on target. She does not work very well with a lot of long-range gunnery beyond 16, 17 kilometers. Things get pretty or quite inconsistent in terms of her accuracy. And then the other aspect, again, I mentioned this, is managing your health. And that to me is actually a really good practice for battleship players to learn how to do anyway when you're on a flank, so that you aren't pushing in too aggressively and getting taken down too early. So it's a good skill to learn, or a good practice to learn. And I think the Hizen is a good ship to set a good example on how to do that. So I have, like I said, I have quite enjoyed this ship, and I do recommend that folks, especially of those of you who like to play battleships, should pick her up. And even those who don't like playing battleships, I think you could find this a quite enjoyable ship to play. So that is going to wrap up my review of this brand new premium Tier 9 Japanese battleship. I hope you enjoyed the commentary. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And as always, we hope to see you out there on the virtual seas, and we wish you happy sailing.